Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. It's Odie Coyote here with Mixed Country 106, and welcome to the second part of our four-part series, Path to Christ. And oh man, after hearing the first one air today, I'm recording this on April 16th. Just hearing the first one today, so nervous on how it was going to come out and the reception that you guys were going to have on it. Still waiting to hear some feedback. I really haven't taken a look at a lot of the comments, but no immediate reactions. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I am grateful though. If you watched the first one, Bullying in the 90s, I'm very thankful that you guys decided to tune in to that. And I hope that it was meaningful. I hope that you found it inspiring. I hope that it maybe gave you comfort if you also had a similar situation as I did growing up. I hope you see the goodness of God through it and through my life and what he did for me. And I hope that he's done the same for you. So God bless you. And we're going to be talking this week. It's called A Second Chance at Life. This one, though, I do need to put a disclaimer out in the very beginning. It deals with difficult subjects such as suicide and severe mental illness. And while I'm not going to have any vulgarity or anything like that, describing it, the subject matter may be inappropriate for some audiences. So just you view at your own discretion. Maybe watch this before you have your kids watch, just to make sure that you feel it's appropriate for them. But it's definitely an important topic, and it's definitely something that is still very prevalent in our society, and even more so probably today with online bullying and things like that. I didn't thankfully have to go through online bullying. My home was my refuge, basically. I mentioned in the first video, just listening to music. I didn't have internet. I didn't have internet until I was 15. So, I didn't really go through that, online bullying and all of that. So I can only imagine how tough it is for those kids. And certainly I have a lot of sympathy for kids that are like that. But I think there's also something that is now to need to be said with parents and how much exposure they let their kids have online, because you certainly don't have to have a Facebook, a Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. You don't have to have any of that. You really don't. In fact, I think for kids, until they're mature enough to really handle it, they don't really need to be on there. Just don't expose yourself to it, So yeah, we're going to be talking this episode about my teenage years. There were some very, very dark years for me, but also at the end were very, very positive, and you would not believe the transformation that I had during this period of time. And this one is going to be super sad, but it's also going to be super, super uplifting at the end. I know when I just think about how I turned out from the beginning to the end, and I compare and contrast, let's say from age 13, 14 to age even 16, 17, just night and day difference. And I get to talk about some of the really cool things that happen, and that way you guys can see a little bit of how things turned out. So all right, so I left off in the last episode. It was right at the time when my mom and I needed to move to Iowa from Memphis, Tennessee, because my grandfather, which is her father, was very sick with cancer. And my grandfather ended up passing away a month or so after we moved, and we moved December 23rd, 1999, from Memphis up to Iowa. And I've lived in Iowa now ever since then. And life for me was just dramatically turned on its head, but I do remember that first Christmas. Didn't have any presents, had a few. My aunt, who we were staying with, and actually, you guys may remember her, Frida. She was very critically ill, and just a side note here, I guess I should probably mention, since she's a part of this initial part of the story, we thought that she was dying and passing away from complications from COVID. And I mean, it's real when she was Catholic and they come in and they give her last rites. Well, I just spoke to her a few weeks ago, and she's doing better than ever now. How amazing in that. I got to know in the Catholic Church, though, you've been read your last rites and you somehow live. Did they read them to you again? How does that work? But certainly a blessing from God that she beat it, and she was in hospice care. They didn't think she was going to make it through the night at one point. It was really scary, and so yet another miracle that I've been witness and been blessed to be witness to. And certainly my Aunt Frida, she is absolutely doing well now, and it's just amazing to see her life being transformed from literally lying on her deathbed to getting out and moving on her own, and basically back to almost a normal life for her. Even, getting off oxygen and all of that, doesn't need the support. That's just amazing. Well, anyway, my aunt, that same aunt, she was the one who took us in when we first moved and gave my mom and I a place to stay because we didn't have a home, no place to stay, no immediate place. My mom immediately moved because, she wanted to take care of her dad, which my grandfather, but no plans for job, no plans for a place to live. My aunt just took us in, and her two boys, her two boys had some mental illness. Either they were mentally disabled, they have intellectual disabilities. And so, that was interesting for me to be growing up around, because I had to learn how to talk to them in a way that they understood, but also in a way that wouldn't make them angry, because they're prone to that. They were going through a lot, and both those boys too are now way better off. One of them's got a master's degree, I think, now in college, like literally a master's, and the other one is still relatively independent, even, and working and productive, and for all intents and purposes, did well. Now, I should mention one of the boys, the older one who has that master's, he did pass away. I shouldn't say he's doing well, but they were both doing well, like later on in life. But Nick, the oldest one, did pass away last year, and so had a blood clot that got into his lungs. So that was a bit difficult for her, but my aunt, being a strong woman that she is, made it through, and she was very strong to have me in the picture. As you guys may remember from the first series, I had a lot of mental illnesses and things and behavior issues, and that certainly was a challenge, I'm sure, for them to deal with me. And the first thing I do remember, the first time I remember feeling severe remorse for my behavior, my actions, was right when my grandfather passed away, because I didn't know that day that he had passed away. I remember I was acting up really bad, drawing a lot of attention. I was just one of the worst times I've ever been an absolute brat, and they sent me to a room, and I was just screaming and making noise up there. And my aunt actually was the one who came up there and said, "You need to hush. You don't know this, but your grandfather passed away today, and you were acting." I don't remember exactly what she said, but she basically really let me know that today of all days was the worst day. I could have been acting like a brat. And I remember that day. I remember then having a flood of realization that, oh wait, I'm being a really bad kid right now. And I came downstairs. I remember crouching behind one of her dining room table chairs and crying and saying, "I'm so sorry." I remember apologizing profusely, in tears and all that, once I realized what I had done and what I had contributed to. And obviously I didn't know until then that's what had happened. And so I don't remember much. I remember the day of the funeral. I remember, since my mom wasn't married, and that I rode in the limo out to the gravesite to bury my grandfather. And I remember being with my mom, and I don't remember if I was like the best behaved kid. I know that I had a change in mind and change in heart, during that time. But I was also wondering too if we were going to end up having to move back to Memphis, and we didn't. We ended up still staying up there with my aunt for, I think, 6 months before we had a little apartment that we moved into. I know it was important. My mom wanted to make sure that I had a bedroom of my own. She knew that music and me being able to listen to the radio is really important to me. And I remember it was a 1-bedroom apartment, and so my mom would sleep in the living room. So we had a futon couch, and so she would pull it out at night to be her bed, and she gave me the bedroom. And I remember that apartment, it had a unique feature. It actually was an old bank that was turned into an apartment, and the apartment that I was in, it actually had a bank vault safe for the closet. So it didn't lock or anything. They took the locking mechanism out of it, but it's still a big, heavy door. Certainly knew where the safest place to go in a tornado would have been. But yeah, so yeah, it had a safe in there for a closet. So I remember that being very unique about it. Um, and eventually we moved to another apartment in the same complex, and it was right above a hair studio. And oh yeah, they loved me there. I would have my music up too loud, and the owner of the hair studio would have to come upstairs and knock on my door and tell me to turn it down. A couple times, they even called the landlords. I was really bad about blasting my music and not really realizing and caring that, yeah, there was a business and other apartments near me and thin walls. Because before in Memphis, we had lived in a duplex, so it was only one person, so long as the neighbor was out. And I remember at one point that one of the neighbors was actually a Memphis City cop. My mom felt pretty good about that. But moving from that, where you had kind of privacy and definitely more of a home-like, to a small apartment, and we stayed in that apartment. That was the only place my mom lived in, actually, until she got really sick. And I'll talk a little about that, because I think what my mom ended up going through affected me pretty heavily, and that was my mom had to go through cancer, and I'll talk about that here shortly. But going back to the really hard stuff on this subject, and this is something that I will tell people in person privately, but I've never said publicly on radio or for YouTube or for social media. So I hope you guys will bear with me as I talk about this, because it's not easy, really not. But even though moving to Iowa, yeah, I had a few more friends than I did in Tennessee, and I had teachers who cared, finally. But I was also had to deal with mental health and that going through puberty, because I went through it, and mentally and behaviorally, oh yeah, I was all over the place. I remember, though, I still got bullied a lot, and the bullying hurt more because the kids got bigger, so getting pushed and shoved hurt more. I remember they found new and creative ways to humiliate me. Most notably, I don't know where this kid is now. Last I heard, he was in prison, which probably wouldn't surprise someone who's one of the biggest bullies in school, I guess. But certainly prayed for him that he would turn his life around. But his name was Larry, and I won't say his last name on camera here, but his name was Larry. And I remember 6th grade, one of the meanest things he ever did to me was I was in the bathroom, and he came up behind me on the urinal stall and kicked me in the rear, and hard enough where I ended up peeing all over the front of myself, which you're thinking, okay, well, in that time I knew nurses usually had extra clothes for accidents and things like that, not because, for older kids, but just outside dirty, wet, something happened, accident, something gets spilled on, things like that. But the thing was, I had to make it across the entire school. The bathroom I was in was kind of the complete opposite side of the middle school, which meant I had to walk humiliated down the hall around all the kids, meanwhile having, urine all over the front of myself. And oh yeah, no, I knew I hated that kid ever since. And now as I'm older, I shouldn't say hate anymore, but at the time I hated him. And yeah, so it's stuff like that. Still got shoved a lot. I think one of the worst times I got bullied was a time that I tried to stick up for myself. And usually when I stuck up for myself, I learned that a lot of kids were bigger and stronger than I was. And one incident was at a park. It's one of my favorite parks. I would go there and sit on the swing and sit there for hours. But I'd also like to go there and play basketball, even if it's just myself, just to shoot around, blow some energy off. And a couple kids a little bit older than I was, I think they're like freshmen in high school, and they were playing for a while, and I asked them if I could even just take up half the court and just have the hoop and everything. They said no. Well, I kind of pushed it a little further, or I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have backed off. I don't know. I was in a mood, I think, that day, and I pushed it. One thing led to another. I got my ass beat. Bad enough that someone saw me afterwards, and it was bad enough that I needed to go to the ER. Got punched pretty hard in the head, chest, and I didn't break any ribs, but just really bruised up pretty bad, and obviously those kids are bigger than me. I have a really bad habit of that, not realizing how much it's going to hurt when I do stick up for myself and how much bigger kids are, and they hit harder. Let's just say that. And that wasn't the only time. One time, I just wanted to prove a point. Thought I'd get a cheap hand in outside of a choir room with the quarterback of the football team. You guys can imagine someone like me, I ran cross country. That doesn't really mean that I have anything here. That one hurt. But even in middle school, I had a bad habit of just behavior. I got in school suspended one time and all that. So you can see where all this goes. It was a combination of me acting out, which provoked them, but also them initially taking advantage of me, not realizing, and me having just bad behavior and just not really dealing with situations very well. But at the time, I don't know, I kind of had a switch in my head around this time, just flip, and I just became extremely paranoid. I thought everybody was talking about me. Some people would classify this as schizophrenia, but I literally was hearing voices saying, just anything that you could. I don't want to repeat it on here because it doesn't really matter. The point is, I was hearing things thinking that people were saying things about me that they weren't. But in some cases they were, right? So I became delirious pretty much just because I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. What was really being said, because there really were at times real mean things being said, but sitting in a lunchroom with a bunch of people talking and you can't perceive who's actually saying something to you. You just know that you hear things in your head and you can't tell if they're real or not. My head was playing massive amounts of tricks on me, frankly, and it was bad. I remember they tried so many meds, and one point when I realized that punching people and all that wasn't getting me anywhere, I would also slip into an extremely depressed state where I could not stand hearing horrible things people saying about me and the bullying and all of that. And yeah, some people took notice. There was therapy. There were things the school, I remember, tried to do. The schools appear at least to try to help me. But I would think at this point I was already just too far gone, and I chose to be too far gone. And the first time that the depression got so bad, I remember there was an in-home therapist who came over, nice guy, and I don't know what it was. It's hard for me to remember because when you get into those fits of either rage or depression, your mind just has a very interesting way of, afterwards, you don't really remember what was said, what you did exactly. It's so fragmented in my mind, even to this day. And as time goes on and I let these things go, because people just understand too that what I'm talking about right now doesn't affect me today in nearly in the same way that it did then. I'm obviously a very different person, but trying to talk in that perspective back then, I don't really know everything I did. I know I pushed him because he said something that I didn't like or something like that, or I probably just went off on a random rage. And so at that point, because I didn't calm down, I remember they were going to call the police because I was that out of control inside my mom's home. And it was at night, and I just made a decision once I saw, the blue and red lights outside. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And when by do this, I meant open up a second story window and jump. And if I wouldn't have just kind of started to think about it, I probably would have jumped sooner or tried to. But as soon as the door opened to the apartment, I think the cop already must have known. I don't even remember who called or what was said during the call. But I immediately saw him and made a beeline through the kitchen. And I think if the window wasn't an old window that got hard to open, kind of stuck window, I would have made it further. But I had it open, and I was just about to grab the ledge and try to throw myself through it. The cop then reached behind me, grabbed my belt, like the back of my waist belt, and pulled me back in. And literally last second you could think about it, saved my life. I was not very happy about him saving my life at that moment. It made me angry and just tyrant, and for that they subdued me, and I went to a mental health treatment facility for a week. They let me out. A couple days later, I threw another fit. My mom had to call the police again because I was acting out of control. This time I met the cop outside, and it happened to be someone my mom knew. Also happened to be like chief of police. That. And I tell people sometimes in person that I try to punch him, which I did, but he's a cop. I'm a small teenager, barely 14, 15 at this point. No, I didn't land anything on him, but I did try to. Mainly get away, mainly run away back, but I didn't get anywhere. That landed me another trip in a police car back to mental health facility. And just to clear this up too, anything that happened that was illegal activity, I did what I needed to do then. And as you'll hear later in the story, it's not a part of my record now today. So I don't have any kind of criminal offenses on me or anything like that. This is all teenage, delinquent, misdemeanor type stuff, really. But still, it could have been a lot worse, and it really should have been probably in that incident a lot worse. But the cop used a lot of discretion there, because I was clearly acting out because of mental health and not in my right state of mind. So that one, I spent 2 weeks back in the hospital, and this time it was decided that it was not safe for me to remain at home. In Iowa, we have this thing, and I don't know if it still exists, called the China program, or Child in Need of Assistance. And it meant that I needed to go stay in a group home for youth and shelter services. And I stayed there for 7 months, but I didn't do my time there quietly. I still got to go to my own school during this time, but had a lot more strict rules. Every time you go back, they searched you. Some of the rooms, who they thought people were like me on suicide. There were times I spent time in a room with a camera, always on. And one time, I hated the rules. I disagreed strongly. And I threw a fit, and I tried to wreck the place. I flipped a table. I was shouting and screaming and did a bunch of other stuff and did some damage to their property. I was also at that time, then once I realized what was going on, I at one point didn't want to eat throughout this period too, leading up to this. And then I, at one point, was just during that fit, was trying to throw myself down the stairs, my second attempt at suicide, if you will. And I was not in a good place, obviously. Just not. It's probably the darkest place I've ever been. No hope. Hated life. I hated everyone. I just felt like in those moments, I couldn't talk to anybody. And believe me, they had me on about every mental health drug you can put a kid on. I mean, some of them at night, when you took them, I was out. It didn't take long at all, and those meds you would just be knocked out, just cold, and you'd sleep, and they'd wake you up early, and you'd still be kind of affected, and just all dizzy, and just very woozy from them. But in that incident where I flipped the table and was throwing myself down the stairs, they called the cops. I had locked myself in a bathroom, and just being dumb. Like, oh yeah, they don't have a key to that bathroom door, do they? Of course they do. Where am I at, right? But that wasn't what I was thinking about. I had no clear thoughts then. And yeah, it was just, it's bad like that. And I realized I want to make these episodes 30 minutes, but this is just such a hard, detailed subject to talk about to really get the picture of what was going on. I feel like this episode's probably going to need to be longer. So bear with me, guys. So the cop came that time after I, just trying to destroy their place. And they opened the bathroom door and I saw him and I immediately tried to run. That was the worst mistake I could have ever made. I tried to run underneath his legs. No, he grabbed me, picked me up by my shirt, slammed me against the wall, and I was in handcuffs. The only time I've legitimately been in handcuffs in my entire life. They hurt, by the way. I had a mark on my wrist for a good week. But yeah, that's... And they were deciding if they were going to take me to the jail or to the hospital. And they ended up electing the hospital. Spent a little bit more time there. I did go back to the shelter, though. They did accept me back. And by the way, the hospital was not fun. If anyone is in this place, just know that when you go to a hospital like that, it isn't like a hospital like you're in a bed and, nurses and stuff come and check on you. No. It's like 24/7 surveillance like you've never imagined before. And by the way, your clothes, they don't have any tie strings on them. You don't wear shoes. You do not get a blanket. You are on a flat mattress in a flat room, like I was for the first few days. There's 2 cameras. There's bars on the door. And if it's really bad, there's a toilet in there. Luckily enough, I didn't have to use the fixed, bolted down to the floor toilet. They did let me out to go use a regular toilet, as long as I was behaving. But every time I would be let out of that room, I was watched and escorted to and from. That is probably the most humiliating and degrading point in my life. And I started to realize either I was going to succeed with suicide or this is what's going to happen. And I didn't like either option, frankly. But being in that hospital also got me into some very intense individual and group therapy. Just all day. It was basically, the entire day was basically spent in once I was 3 days in that room, they let me out because I'd calmed down enough. It took me 3 days to calm down. And I'd never been much of an art kid, ever. I probably have the artistic ability of a first grader. I remember there was a portrait they did, describe how I'm feeling in a picture, right? And when I was finished, and I still remember the picture in my mind, I don't have the physical picture anymore. I wish I did if I knew I was going to be sharing this story. But the photo, or not the photo, but the picture that I drew, I think was the most telling picture that you could have ever had. At one point, you start to see sadness, or happiness, but on the top end, you see all the dark clouds around it. It's like I wanted to be happy deep down, but I was just surrounded, and I kept surrounding myself by all this like darkness and just, isolation. And when I got out of the hospital after the couple of weeks of another week's intense therapy there, of course, I was charged with the crime, misdemeanor, destruction of property and all that. And I had to go to a court hearing. And the prosecuting attorney didn't have all the documents that they needed for that particular hearing. They were missing some critical documents that made it so that day we couldn't move forward. Well, the judge looks at me, the turning point of my life, right here. Listen, if you haven't listened very carefully to any of the part of this story and this testimony of mine, listen here to this part and what the judge told me, because this changed my life dramatically. He said, "John, I'm going to give you one final chance. One mess up, one screw up, I am sending you to juvenile prison." That's where I was. And he said, if the attorney would have had all their stuff today, I could and probably could have been persuaded to send you there right now, today. I thought the home was bad. I knew prison, jail, frankly, for juveniles, way worse. I got to hear stories from kids who actually were in there and got out, but were still in like a youth shelter. And those kids, by the way, were just like me in the respect they had a lot of issues. Some of them were drug addicts as teenagers. Some of them had very abusive parents. Some of them had no parents, and they're basically just orphaned children who had nobody. So you can imagine they didn't exactly fit in with the crowd. Frankly, I didn't either. But that moment changed my life when that judge said, "I'm giving you one last chance." And being in a courtroom knowing that I'm charged with a crime and I'm sitting on the defense side of the table. And I have no defense. I know what I did. I didn't understand why I was doing it. I was acting out of pure just anger and frustration. There was no direct, concentrated intent to do anything. Just, I'm mad. I blew my top. But that didn't matter. I still committed a crime. I still had community service to do. I still had restitution to pay. Still had all of those things that I had to do. I remember spending a summer, and it was, I guess for community service, probably one of the more cushy jobs you could have done, but it still sucked for a teenager. But I helped at the medical center in Nevada move paper medical records over when they had built a new clinic. My mother, who worked for the medical center as a biller, was able to get me in, and it counted as community service. So I spent many hours moving boxes of old x-rays from one place to another. But that's how I got my my community service in. There could have been a lot worse places I could have, had to do time and service at, but a local hospital was probably an easier one. So I kind of got lucky there. My mother saved me on that one. And oh yeah, I had a probation officer. Yeah, they watch you. They think your parents are strict. You don't want to mess with your probation officer, because any minute they could just pull you and bring you right back in. Oh yeah, I knew it. And I had to complete all these therapy sessions too. And it was not easy. It was very rigorous. But I tell you what, I'm going to look right here at the camera when I tell you guys this. Group therapy absolutely works. When I can hear and see that other kids were going through the exact same thing mentally as I was, and how they were dealing with the voices in their head that were lying to them, that changed my perspective. I wasn't the only one. I mentioned in my first video that as a kid, I loved the camps where, because I was visually impaired and that, I got to go and there were other kids just like me. That's what saved me, I think, in a lot of regards. I wasn't alone. I knew that there were other people dealing with this finally. And it was uplifting. And I always knew I was a smart kid, but see, when I was a freshman, I almost had to repeat my freshman year of high school. I literally barely passed by one final, you know? And I did have to retake earth science. I remember that. I did have to take that class again in my sophomore year. But here's the thing. Fast forwarding a little bit here. When I got done with the therapy, I was back at school, and through that process, I even got to go back home to my mom. See, when my mom gave me up to the Child in Need of Assistance program, she had to give up custody of me. And only when the state felt that I wasn't a danger to myself or society were they giving my mom back her custodial rights over me. My mother loved me enough to know that she couldn't help me anymore, and that only the state resources and their custody would be able to help, because she no longer could. And yes, there were times I pushed my mom, and I hate myself for that. But I'm glad I got done with those times when I did, because with what I would have to cope with my mom, I probably would have committed suicide if I had to do it again. So after starting to improve my grades from D's and F's to B's and C's and eventually even to A's, my senior year of high school, after getting done with all that therapy, my senior year, around mid-year, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my mom had to go through treatment. She had to go through a double mastectomy. She missed a lot of work. We really struggled financially. My mom was struggling. And people in our community really helped. There was a big fundraiser. I remember, though, I was dating a girl, and her folks were the reason they actually bought my tux so I could go to prom, or not prom, but winter formal. And I had to be there for my mom. And still not being fully perfect, I still had mental illness. But at least I had some tools to deal with it. And my mom, she beat breast cancer. She beat it. Thank God for that. I don't know what I would have done with myself if my mom passed away from it. And it wasn't like early stages breast cancer. It's like, I think, stage 3, borderline stage 4. Sorry, guys. But I'm grateful that she beat it. Got to have her around more. Now, I'll share more about my mom in my next episode. It's this one I wanted to focus on, my teenage years and that. I know in my later teenage years, I did go to church. I had made some friends who had a Christian rock band, and I got to go to different churches and help them with sound, because my granddad had bought me a DJ set. I was really passionate about DJing and wanted to do like that. And I remember I think it was my senior year, I got to DJ one of my own school dances. And so I had a PA system, and so I would use it with these guys and go to different churches and would set up sound for them. And it was really fun. But again, I started to know Christ, but I just didn't have the relationship with him yet. But it's coming. I think Christ was chasing me every step of the way from here trying to get me away from the devil and his voices and letting them consume me. And I'm so thankful that even before I knew Christ, Christ knew me and was trying to steer me away from where I was, kept me from taking the most precious gift that he ever could give you, which is life. I was so selfish back then to take that or want to take that. I wanted to have a song for this, but I don't really have a good one like I did in the first one. So for the hour that this is airing on Mixed Country 106, we're going to play Christian music for the remainder. Got about 20 minutes here, I think, in the hour. And I just want to thank you guys for letting me talk with you guys a little bit longer than the 30 minutes that I normally was hoping to. And thank you for sticking around. Last thing I wanted to say, though, about it is there was a plaque that I received my senior year during graduation called the A+ Award. And it was for the student who was most improved from their freshman year to their senior year. And I won that. I still have that plaque. I know it's buried in a tub, and I should have gotten it out for this. But I got a plaque because I really did change my life around. And it began with that judge telling me what my consequences would be and if I didn't. And then finally listening to people who were trying to help. So I really hope this helps. I'm sorry if it made anyone sad and cry like it did me. It is sort of sad, but I hope you see it was also triumphant, and it was all in preparation so that I could be strong enough to deal and help my mother when she needed me the most. She had done so much for me, and I needed to be there for her. But I had to get through what I was going through, or I would even be of help to her. And I'm so glad that God led me in that path to get out. I blame myself for going in, but I thank God for getting out. Thank God for this. You know, it's a blessing. So I hope to not have to talk to my kid directly about suicide, but I do want to be open with him. If he's feeling sad, if he's feeling depressed or bullied, I want to let him know that me as his dad and his mom for sure, we are there to help him and love him no matter what circumstance he finds himself in. That's the lesson that I got now that I can share as a dad. And I'm sharing this story with you, and I hope and pray that it helps you, because as you can tell, it was not the easiest thing for me to talk about. All right. Thank you guys so much. God bless. I will be back with another episode next week where I'll be talking about my early adult years. And then my final episode is going to be about things currently and where I'm at, and obviously my profession in Christ. The next one, you're not going to want to miss it, because it's actually when I find Christ. And the big early days and years after becoming a Christian and really having that resonant life within me given over and letting Christ in me. So hope you guys will stick around for that. Thank you guys so much for listening to Mixed Country 106. I'm Odie Lofton and Odie Coyote. Thank you guys so much. God bless you.